Good evening, folks. This is the new chapter we have. It functions as our chapter 8, and we're titling it, Should I Flush That? Which is basically saying we have a lot of things we put in the water. Humans do. There's a lot of things in the water naturally, such as there might already be bacteria, parasites, or chemicals naturally in the water. Or it could be human contributions like pesticides, or adding chemicals to our water, or just contaminating water through sewage, every time we flush the toilet. The question is, though, is how do we as a society deal with water pollution and things in the water? And how does that water interact with our body? Our body is made up of a lot of water, so our body does interact with it. Our cells contain water. Our cells transport things in and out of themselves. So depending on what's going on with your water, it really does affect your body, from headaches and fatigue to all the way down to irritation and nausea. You never quite know, but you can see that water pollution and the water that we have in our soil can potentially get into our bodies and affect our cells. We know our cells aren't perfect. They have a cell membrane that protects them, but they also are made up of these proteins that help transport things internally, in and out. And if it transports something in that's bad, it could have consequences for the cells. If you haven't already, you should, in this section, you should have already numbered your pages. Enter the title of this new chapter, Should I Flush That?, into your notebook, and of course add a title and a pocket for this section. All right, let's keep moving forward. This activity is meant for in class, so if you haven't done this activity, please do. All right, this is slide 3. I believe we've probably done this in class already, but if you don't have the notes, this is slide 3, and it's 3 primary problems that we're going to focus on. These are generally the same as our last chapter, called Do You Have Cell Service? But we're copying down this again for chapter 8. And again, we're looking at the tiny cells that make up our bodies. And we want to know what's going on in the environment that affects our bodies and what's going on in the cellular level that it impacts that. So we want to copy these 3 problems down and, of course, give them some decoration and add to it. All right, here's slide 4. Slide 4 is a reference to an activity we've already done or will do soon. And it's called dropping signals. And it's just an activity that we can see really effectively how chemicals affect our cells. And do those chemicals get absorbed into the cell? Do they bond and make chemical bonds with the surface, the membrane of our cell? So, dropping signals. Let's check it out. Here, just as a review, if we've already done this before, and if not, it's a fresh start to check it out. Let's put some nitric oxide chemical on muscle cells, and let's see if this chemical has an effect on the cell. Crazy. It caused these muscle cells to relax. Let's throw a hormone on it. So that's another kind of chemical the body makes. Hormones can be proteins that float in the blood, and they can react with a different cell. Let's see if they react with this cell. So, hormones can increase the chance of a cell absorbing something it needs, going through the cell membrane. It can even have other consequences. You put this cytokine on skin cells. So depending on the chemicals we're exposed to, it can even increase cancer. So these chemicals interact with our cell membrane, and they can cause the cell, if they get absorbed, to potentially respond a certain way. This happens as should be review, which is a reference to our receptor protein. So anytime a chemical, if the right type of chemical bonds to receptors on our membrane, just like here's another example. We've seen this before. But if a chemical does bond to a receptor protein, it causes a response, just like you see here. And that response could be cancer, or it could be the cell divides. But chemicals, whether they come from outside the body or from something we produce on our own, can have consequences, and it could be good or bad, as we've studied before. Here's a really good image. It's a model of a cell membrane, and it shows you all the different types of proteins that your outer cell membrane may have. And you can see they transport things in and out. If you're lucky, they're transporting internally things the cell needs, amino acids or glucose, so that the cells can live and produce energy. This doesn't show the cell receptor proteins, those receptor proteins that kind of bond things on the outside, but they're still there also. No single model has everything. But the idea is it's shipping things in and out that could be good or bad. We have right here, Tales of Caution. We'll do this in class. This is slide 6, and it has to do with kind of things that are going on in our environment, and most often California, that can have us think about what's in our water, or what happens when a chemical is exposed to our body. How do our cells transport or protect us from these things? Can they transport the chemical out? Do they transport the chemical into your body? If it's a toxin and your body transports it internally, if your cells transport it in, it's bad news, right? Look at this. It says Tales of Discovery and Caution. You have the LSD molecule here, made up of what I assume to be lots of carbon, hydrogen, some nitrogen, and maybe one other item I can't quite recognize. Let's see. Let's look at the chemical formula here. So it contains carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. Okay, so this is one oxygen, the blue are nitrogens, but this molecule is crazy. If it lands on your skin cells probably will transport it internally into your body, and it will transport it not only inside your body but to your bloodstream, where it eventually will bind to receptor proteins in your brain. So just like we started a study before, it'll bond to these receptor proteins. It'll actually cause the brain cells in your head to start imagining things that aren't really there. Your goal, we're going to watch a video, I'm going to play it, and you're going to hypothesize what actions led to the hallucination. So you're going to watch it's a virtual kind of cartoon, and you're going to try to identify what do you think caused the individual to hallucinate? And the second task will be revise your hypothesis using new evidence. So what do you think? If you have to change your hypothesis, you can change it afterwards. But you're basically watching the video and you're going to try to hypothesize. What do you think led to the hallucinations? What do you think caused it? All right, so let's try to do that. Clearly, this individual, something happened to them and they started hallucinating. This is a retelling of the true story about Albert Hoffman, the individual who first studied and experienced LSD, and it was accidental. Question is, hypothesize what led to hallucinations. How do you think he came into contact with LSD? It was in liquid form, and that liquid, when it landed on his skin, was absorbed and transported into his body, and he started to hallucinate. And he wasn't feeling well in the lab, and he went home and he rode his bike home. And this is a true retelling of what he experienced. All you have to do is you can skip all the three things, just focus on this one thing. It says, in the video, hypothesize what actions led to the hallucinations. So what do you think in the video caused him to come in contact with LSD? Come up with your hypothesis. You can just put, my hypothesis is. All right, next slide is slide 8. And I haven't given you the definition yet, but we have the word solution, which you probably have heard in your chemistry chapters of 8th grade science. And all of these potentially can be made into a solution or already is. Cactus cooler is a solution. It's a combination of water and other ingredients, so things dissolved in water. We have Kool-Aid powder, which the powder itself dissolves into water, makes a solution. And then you have ramen packet, which is a salty, wonderful, delicious seasoning. When it's dissolved in water, it makes a solution. So which solution would you rather have and why? So this is just for fun. Just what would you rather have? Would you rather have the salty, yummy goodness of ramen powder or some ramen? Or would you rather have some Kool-Aid or cactus cooler? So you choose the one you prefer and tell me why. Number 2 is recognize a common element in ramen seasoning. So the hint is NaCl. So if you're not sure what Na represents or Cl represents, you need to Google it. And then for number 2, all you put is, what are the elements Na and Cl? Because they're the most common ingredient in ramen powder and ramen seasoning. All right, next thing is what is the main molecule dissolved in a cactus cooler? If you're not sure, take C6H12O6 and Google it. C6H12O6, so it has 6 carbon, 12 hydrogen, and 6 oxygen. Take that chemical formula and Google it and find out what is the primary molecule, the one that's most often dissolved in cactus cooler. And there you go. And then it says, number 4, it says, construct a simple method for IDing dissolved molecules. So how would you try to identify what was dissolved in any of these things? How could you figure it out? How can you find out a mystery thing that's dissolved into a liquid? Come up with a simple method. There's lots of different possibilities. Whichever way you think would help you figure out what kind of thing is dissolved in water. All right, next up, we have slide 9. Slide 9 is 2 definitions, solvent and solute, and it comes with some activities. So first of all, for slide 9, you want to write the definition down for solvent and solute. And then after that, and of course, let's talk about this real quick. A solvent is the substance that has something dissolved into it. So water, in biology, we talk about water a lot. Our bodies and cells live in water. Our bodies contain 70 to 80% water. So the most common solvent in living organisms is water. And we want to also talk about what's dissolved into the water, which is the substance that gets dissolved. So anything that's dissolved into water is called a solute. And the water, which helps dissolve the powder or something dry, tends to be called a solvent. So here you go. So it's Kool-Aid powder. Kool-Aid powder. Is Kool-Aid powder a solute or a solvent? Take a guess. Next up, we have ramen seasoning packet. The ramen seasoning. Is it a solute or solvent? So read the definitions. Does ramen seasoning get dissolved or does it dissolve something else? If you think it gets dissolved, you call it a solute. If you think it dissolves something else, then you call it a solvent. Here we go, water. In this example, which one is this, solvent or solute? Water. And then finally, this one's a good one. So it's 2 liquids. In all the other examples, you have dry and liquid. It makes it a little easier to guess, but here we have food coloring drops. So it's a liquid coloring, and the liquid coloring, and it's dropped into water. In this example, which one would be the solute and the solvent? Is the food coloring the solute, or is the food coloring the solvent? You decide.